Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. Meshing. Let's talk about meshing. There are many places where meshing as a structure can be a really good thing. But if you're a network administrator or a system administrator, any sort of an admin really, you can quickly find that meshing is not the be-all and end-all. And I will explain, we will explore why that is. So, first off, what's a mesh? A mesh is probably pretty intuitive to understand. If you think about any sort of mesh in real life, if talking about a physical object, you're thinking about probably something like a series of wires or a series of lines that are crossing each other at regular intervals to provide something like a sieve or a fishing net. It's a mesh. Okay. In computing, it's kind of the same idea, except everywhere the lines cross, you understand that there is a node there. There is a device, and then the lines represent the connections from that device to other devices in the mesh. Cool. Why is this useful? Well, a mesh, when it is implemented as a full mesh, which is what people usually consider when they talk about a mesh, in a full mesh, every device has a connection, a direct connection to every other device. This means that communications can be very fast because you're talking about just going one line between any device, just one line. Okay, cool. When you have a break in the mesh, you can still get communications through by having your communication hop across multiple devices to the other device that you're trying to reach. And so meshing can be very resilient as well. So there are definite positives to that. You can also have each link in a mesh be a lower powered connection. If you're doing a partial mesh, where only some devices are fully connected, and you can think of a partial mesh as being something more similar to an actual physical wire mesh or nylon mesh, because not every intersection has a direct connection to every other intersection. It's a grid, and if you're talking about a standard square-ish or diamond, pattern, then each intersection really only has like 4 direct connections. So that's a partial mesh rather than a full mesh. And you can see these mesh designs in a lot of places. You can see them when you are developing network structures for things like domain controllers. In an Active Directory domain, typically speaking, within a single site, it is expected that every domain controller can talk to every other domain controller. That is a full mesh. In multiple sites, then typically you have 1 or 2 domain controllers that will handle outbound and inbound replication to other sites. That is a different architecture, which I will get to. But if you're thinking about things like a WireGuard VPN, or really any VPN, whether it's OpenVPN or IPsec or WireGuard or what have you, each VPN is typically structured as a point-to-point connection. If you have multiple sites, multiple offices, say, then you may end up with a full mesh where every office can talk to the other offices. And we'll see how the pursuit of redundancy and reliability can lead a network administrator down the path of constructing a full mesh. But then you rapidly reach a point where it's not scalable anymore. At least it's not scalable manually. Or at least it's not scalable manually. So you rapidly get to a point where you either need to change your architecture and reimagine it, or you need to move to a different solution that is less manual and more automated. So let's start by actually doing a little diagram here. I am going to draw 2 sites because, one site on its own, okay, great. You don't need to connect it anywhere. So let's look at one site here and one site here. Okay? 2 sites. They're just sitting there. You want to connect them. All right, cool. So there it is. 2 sites connected by a single link. Great. Is this a full mesh? Yeah. I mean, there's only one link, so it's not much of a mesh, but every device is connected to every other device, or in this case, every site is connected to every other site. So you could argue that it technically meets the definition of a mesh, even though looking at it, you'd go, this is just a point-to-point connection. It's not really a mesh. Thanks for playing. But let's say that we add a 3rd site here. And I'm being deliberately vague with some of my terminology because, like I said, this could be sites, this could be domain controllers within a domain, this could be a bunch of sync thing nodes doing replication amongst each other. And we're talking about which devices have connections to which other devices. So there's many ways that you can do this. So let's add a 3rd site here. How do we want to connect it? Well, if you want, you can do just a single other connection. Great. So what happens if this node goes down? How do the other 2 sites talk to each other? So for redundancy and reliability, you'll probably have something that looks a little bit more like that, right? You want to make sure that if this node goes bye-bye, then these 2 can still talk to each other. Great. Is this a full mesh? Yeah, pretty much. This is a full mesh. This is a full mesh setup. You've added all the nodes. They each have a connection to each other. That's a full mesh. Conceptually, at least. All right. Now think about how much work this is to configure. You go, well, there's only 3 sites. That really can't be that much to configure. That's what, 3 VPN connections? Yeah, but think for a moment that what you're actually doing is 1 connection, 2 connections, 3 connections, 4 connections, 5 connections, 6 connections. That's 6 VPN connections that you've had to manually configure across 3 devices. And that's doable. If a single device goes down, you're doing 2 connections to 2 other devices. Okay, fine. Like I said, this level is doable. But what happens if you've got more? Let's add a 4th node to our diagram here. Right there. Now, if I want to make this full mesh, what do? Well, if I want to make it full mesh, then I need to add connections to every other node. And I wind up with something that basically looks like this. Cool. How many connections is this? Now each device has 3 connections to keep track of. And because each connection has 2 ends to it, that means that you've got 3 connections times 4 devices. That's 12 connections. We've gone from 6 connections to 12 connections just by adding a single additional site. When you go from 3 to 4 nodes, maybe you think, well, you know what? Maybe I don't need this link here. Maybe this link can go away and just these 2 nodes have a backup through one other node in the mesh. Okay, you can do that. That's a partial mesh. And you can do that, but most people will probably look at it and go, you know, I'm only saving myself 2 connections by dropping this one link. Is 10 connections that much less than 12? Is it worth it? Or do I just make the thing a full mesh and be done with it? That's where you kind of want to be careful. Because let's keep expanding it and see what happens, right? Let's add another node. And I will draw in a full mesh just for the sake of argument. And you get something that looks like that. You added a new node, and suddenly that node has 4 connections to every other device. But more than that, you've added 4 connections and then another 4 connections that you had to configure to receive those connections. You added 1 device and had to do 8 more connections. And now you've got 5 nodes with 4 connections each. You've gone from a total of 12 individual connections to set up to 20. And every single time you do that, you add another node, it's going to be adding a lot of additional connections. This is why doing it manually is not a great idea, honestly. But what are some alternatives? What are some alternative connections? Well, you could go partial mesh. You could go hub and spoke. Let's see what those look like. So let's start with hub and spoke. All right? In a hub and spoke, you have one central site, the hub, and then you have a few other sites, and they're all connected not to each other, but to the central hub. And you get something that looks like this. This is 6 nodes, but you've only got 12 connections. No, you don't. You have 10 connections. Watch me count. Good mathing. You have 5 connections among 6 nodes, and there's 2 ends to each connection, so that's 10 individual configurations that you've had to do. This is a good scalable system, but it's not very reliable, is it? Because if your central node goes away, nobody has anything. Maybe that's okay if you have all your servers or your file shares or your other resources in a central place. And if that place is down, oh well. But for larger corporations or more resilient architecture, that's just not going to fly. It's not. So what's something that does fly? Is there something that we can draw that makes it a little more resilient, but doesn't give us as much trouble? Yes, there is. Let's start with a full mesh, but a very small full mesh. This is only 3 nodes. this is relatively easy to handle in full mesh. Now, let's say that we add a few others, just for the sake of argument, right? What happens if we wind up with something that looks like that? This is a partial mesh. You have, what is this, 12 nodes? That's a significantly higher number than any of the other designs we've looked at so far. And what you've got is 1, 2, 3, 4 times 3. You've got 12 links, 24 configurations for 12 nodes. That's pretty decent. Because if you think about it, this was 20, and this is 24. 5 nodes here, 12 nodes here. So this is a much more scalable design for your replication. You've got a core, that the core is fully connected to each other. Great. And then you've got like another 3 subsites off of each one. If you lose one of your core nodes, you didn't lose the entire network. You didn't lose your entire connectivity. You just lost one branch of it. Let's add another set to this extended diagram, and we'll see if there's a way that we can make it even just a little more resilient when we go higher up in the, at least higher up in the terms of the node connections. Let's take a look at this. Does this make sense? Where we've added another node and then another subsite off of that. Does this make sense? Well, maybe you've still got a core in full mesh, and then you've got several subsites off of each one. But is this necessary? Could you take out these 2 links in the center and just have a ring architecture instead? You probably could. It might even look something like this. Hang on a second, this one's going to be a little more involved. Let's start with this. This is, again, 12 nodes, and we're connected in a ring architecture. Each one of these is, this is 12 nodes, 12 connections, and it's a little more open. 12 links, 24 configurations, excuse me. But there it is. But we still have the problem of, you know, if we lose one of our ring routers or ring connections, the others can all communicate one way or another, but we've lost connectivity for these 2 subsites. So how do we make this one a little more resilient? Well, one way that you might make it more resilient looks like this. Now, each one of these subsites actually has 2 connections to a single ring node, but also to a backup ring node. So if you lose this one here, everything can still talk to each other. This is not full mesh. This is partial mesh with a core that's made up of a ring. And ideally, you can just relay traffic along this and it'll work great. But this is also more complicated to plan and more complicated to configure, especially if you're doing it all manually. So, while you can conceive and conceptualize these designs, just like I did right here on paper, drawing links and figuring out what happens if one of these goes down, what's broken, what's damaged. And is this something that I can live with? Or is it something that I really need to put in the complexity both to configure from scratch, to maintain, to troubleshoot? The additional ongoing complexity you need to consider. Is it worth it to put all of that effort, ongoing effort, into a more resilient design, or do I really care if, two subsites get knocked offline because their local core system had an issue? That decision basically comes down to your individual use case. So there's no one right or wrong answer for that. But an alternative, when you start getting into large, more complex networks, is to give the network the ability to essentially self-construct and adapt to things. This is how routing protocols work across the wider internet. If you set up a few individual connections to individual systems that can then advertise, and this is what I can hear over here, and this is what I know I can reach through this other system. Okay, then you can start to cooperatively patch together a diagram, essentially, don't know a better way to phrase it, but a map of how your connections can flow from system to system. In a larger network like that, that will help when a device goes offline. You don't have to reconfigure everything manually. The system just fails over and continues to work. And where this really starts to work better is if, as an administrator, you only need to worry about a few of these connections. If you are the network administrator for a single company that has an architecture like this, and you decide to do all that manually, God bless you. You probably have a team of people at this size to help with that. Something that can keep it more manageable. These subsites only have 2 connections. They can be relatively simple. One of the core sites, on the other hand, has 6 connections that it needs to maintain. 2 to the other members of the ring, and then 4 of the subsites. For primary or backup purposes, it doesn't really matter. It's 6 connections for each one of these central nodes, and 2 for the outlying ones. If you're only responsible for one of the central sites, 6 connections probably is okay. If you think about it, before you had 2 ring connections, that hasn't changed, and you had 2 subsites. Okay, so your total connections have gone from 4 to 6. That's not huge. It's a 50% increase, but 4 to 6 in terms of raw numbers is not huge. But you've made it significantly more resilient. And so if that's the only site that you have to worry about, that's not so bad. It's pretty important to consider this. And the same is true in other structures as well. I mentioned syncing. You can go with a hub and spoke replication model where most of your data is in a single central site and it just broadcasts out. You can do that. If you want it to be more resilient, you might need to consider having a few, 2 or 3 sites that act as a central site, and then break up the connections to all of the outlying subsites to only go to a local node or a designated central node. You might say for resiliency, they need to be able to connect to 2 of those. Okay. If you're configuring it all manually, that can be a lot. So that's where automated systems start to become a lot more meaningful at that point. Take Tailscale as an example. A WireGuard based VPN is really easy. It's point to point. But if you have a lot of systems, let's say you have 20 nodes, 20 systems that all want to communicate, and they all want to do it by point to point because this is an overlay network. This is all VPN. This is not a central site. This is just 20 nodes that want to talk to each other as well as maybe a central site. Can you use hub and spoke? You could, but what happens if that goes down? How do you dynamically say, okay, well, I need to have each one of, if you did full mesh, it would be each one of these 20 devices has to have 19 connections to talk to everything else. Okay, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I need to have, well, what's a good central site? What's all this? It gets to be a problem quickly. And so systems like Tailscale exist to say, all right, these nodes need to talk to each other. Let's automatically set up a WireGuard point-to-point connection in the background, and the computer can use it. So you start looking for automated systems that can figure out, where does the traffic actually need to go? Where is it permitted to go? And let's set up the connection in the background rather than it being an admin-controlled activity, manually done every single time. The manual way works. Let's be clear about that. The manual way works. And for small setups, 3 sites, they want to talk to each other. Okay, 3 sites is no big deal. That's in the small, even to the medium business level. You can get away with doing it manually. If you go larger and larger, you need to start thinking about how to do it in an automated fashion because it's just not scalable to do it otherwise. But yeah, there's some talk about meshing and some of the thought that goes into constructing this, as well as the benefits and drawbacks to more meshed or less meshed designs. That was a lot, though. So thank you for sticking with me, and hopefully that was of benefit to you. If you have other thoughts on things that you would like to hear me talk about or things that you'd like to see me demonstrate, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door NetAdmin, and we will see you next time.